You're listening to the AmWritingFantasy podcast. In today's publishing landscape, you can reach fans all over the world. Query letters are a thing of the past. You don't even need a literary agent. There is nothing standing in the way of making a living from writing. Join two best-selling authors who have self-published more than 20 books between them. Now, on to the show with your hosts, Autumn Burt and Jesper Schmidt.
Hello, I'm Jesper.
And I'm Autumn.
This is episode 108 of the AmWritingFantasy podcast, and I think today's topic is very well timed. You know, we're fresh into 2021 and are all looking ahead to the coming year, and hopefully a year where we can put the worldwide pandemic behind us and start thinking about the future a bit. But yeah, if we look 10 years back, 10 years ago, or thereabouts at least, indie authors started self-publishing as digital tools and devices like the Kindle made it possible. And we have also, over the last year or two, seen a very big growth in audiobooks. But I'm going to say that we are yet to see the next true market disruption, because it's not audiobooks. Instead, I believe that in the coming decade, AI or artificial intelligence will revolutionize the publishing industry. So in today's episode, we're going to unpack this for you and see where it all leads us.
It's so exciting. I mean, this is almost like a sci-fi episode, but I guess it has something to do with fantasy.
It's definitely, it has to do with marketing and writing and so on and so on.
That's right.
In a different environment and in a different future.
Yes, it's definitely something we are going to have to deal with if you pay any attention to some of the news out there on AI. But we'll get to that first. This is really we're recording behind or ahead, however you want to say it. So for us, it's just the new year, and you're back off of your holiday vacation. So how are things on your side of the planet?
Yeah, I was just off today, actually, back from vacation. I must admit, it was a bit difficult to get out of bed this morning. It felt very early when the alarm clock went off.
Oh, I bet.
I was just getting used to sleeping in. So that was what it was. But it was one of those vacations that didn't really feel like a vacation. As we've talked about in previous episodes, we've been moving out of our house and all of that. So we are pretty much settled now in our new place. But I feel like I need a new vacation now.
I bet you do. Yeah, we had very much a different type of work on your vacation where you had to resettle an entire house. So yeah, that's a little more challenging than, hanging up Christmas decorations.
Yeah, that's true. It was very limited with Christmas decorations because we just didn't have time.
Well, you had lots of boxes. Just no trees.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. But they did not look very Christmas-like.
No, you should have drawn pictures on them.
Yeah, probably. Yeah, that might have been better. But actually, in between unpacking all those boxes, I did find the time here and there to watch a bit of Netflix. And I actually just yesterday I finished watching that new Netflix series called Alien Worlds, and I know you saw that one as well, Autumn.
I did. That was pretty interesting.
What did you think of it?
I thought it was entertaining more than scientific, because coming from an ecologist point of view, everything they talked about on Earth I'd already known, and how they applied it to the alien worlds were at times driving me a little crazy because they're overlooking some major things. Especially the last episode, my husband and I were both going, shouldn't there be like ruins? How did this civilization get there? What kind of life is it to just be a brain in this little gel case? We were just like, ugh. But the rest of them were okay. What did you think of it?
I think it was pretty good inspiration for world building. I agree that it might be a bit simplified, and there was some major questions that they sort of just glanced over. I was also really curious about that alien civilization in the last episode. They explained how it was like a hive mind,
right?
And that how they lived forever. And I was really curious about, okay, so what does that mean, and how does that work? So I immediately wanted to start world building that and understand how does that work. But it's quite a short show, right? I think 4 episodes of approximately 50 minutes, something like that each. So it doesn't take long to watch, and I thought it was quite entertaining. And yeah, it might be a bit simplified, but on the other hand, I sort of also liked how they used Earth as a starting point
Yes, that was very
for those,
useful.
because yeah, but also because it made it a bit educational at
Mhm.
the same time as well, for details about Earth that you might not be aware of, which I thought that was pretty nice
Yeah,
actually. So
it made a good segue. I mean, I love it when they bring up topics like water is weird. That's one of my favorite
yeah,
science
yeah.
topics. So it is fun to get to watch that again. So it was totally worth it. I highly recommend for people to go and watch it.
Yeah. So how about you? How was your well, I don't even think I could call it vacation for you, but
I worked every single day, even
yeah, no.
Christmas. Oh yes, so I've been good. My biggest complaint is my goal was to finish writing this trilogy I've been working on January 1st. I wanted it done for the new year, so I'd be working on edits right now, and I still have 4 chapters. My climax, it's the last book in a series. It's so complicated, and all these, well, the way I write things, and all these plot lines and things happening. And even though I have it plotted out, I ended up writing the chapters 2 or 3 times each. 2 of them, they just would not click together, and if I couldn't get them right, I couldn't set up the events for the following. I'm down to the last 4 chapters. I mean, I'm so close. I can't complain. I mean, it is, for when we're recording this, we're only a few days into January, so I'm very close, and I should finish it by the end of the week. But I wanted it to be done. But besides that, I got the AmWritingFantasy website back online. I finished up a lot of email migration stuff. I did all these things, but I'm looking forward to my own vacation, which to me is possibly taking a week off of maybe some AmWritingFantasy stuff and just maybe sitting down with Photoshop or something. I actually have 3 covers. Now that I almost finished writing, I have to do 3 covers. And I have not even started on those. So I've got to get my artistic graphic designer hat back on and get going.
Not to mention a fantasy map.
I know, and a logo and a few other things in the back burner too.
A week on the internet with the Am Writing Fantasy podcast.
This welcome message is a bit overdue because, because of the pre-recorded, we pre-recorded some of the podcast episodes to last us through the Christmas holidays. And then we also had the interview with Brian Coing, which went out a few weeks back. So, we just haven't had a chance to welcome Joel April until now.
Yes.
I hope I pronounced that last name correctly.
But welcome anyway.
But,
we did our best.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Joel, for joining us on Patreon. We really appreciate that.
Definitely.
Yeah, and it's actually so that we are only a couple of $5 signups away from reaching the first goal on Patreon. And this first goal triggers a dedicated Patreon-only Q&A session.
Yes.
So if you, dear listener, haven't checked out Patreon yet, please find the link in the show notes, and we offer all kinds of additional rewards to our Patreon supporters. So just have a look and see what you think.
Yeah, we'd love to have you over there. I mean, there's every Monday, every week, we're doing episodes as well as early releases of the podcast, answering questions. So it's quite a little community over there. We'd love to have you join us.
Absolutely. And actually, speaking of the internet, Autumn, I have something completely different I wanted to mention.
Okay. What would that be? You're like springing surprises on me. I've noticed this recently.
I do. It's so much more fun when I get your reaction live on the podcast rather than...
I'm being tortured, people.
No, I found some really funny... How do you say that? Analogies? Is that how you say it?
Yep.
Yeah. Somebody called Melody posted them on Facebook. I don't know Melody, but they were just so funny that I thought I would mention the 3 best ones.
Okay.
Because they were so funny. And I hope these are just made up stuff so I don't accidentally insult somebody, because I have no idea what they are, where they came from. It was just so fun.
Oh no.
So, okay, so here goes 3 very funny analogies. The first one. John and Mary had never met. They were like 2 hummingbirds who had also never met. It's just ridiculous.
That's might need a little bit of work. With today's episode, I have a suggestion for that one. But okay, what's number 2?
Okay, number 2. I just have to stop laughing as well because I found these so stupid. From the attic came an unearthly howl. The whole scene had an eerie, surreal quality. Like when you're on vacation in another city and Jeopardy comes on at 7 p.m. instead of 7:30.
What?
It's just like it makes no sense at all.
Oh, if that's your level of life tension disruption, you come spend a week with me. I will train you into true emergency situations. Oh my goodness.
Oh, these are so good. It's incredible. It made me laugh so bad this morning, so I just had to put some of them in here.
No.
Okay, the third one is not any better at all.
No.
So are you ready?
I know.
He was as lame as a duck. Not the metaphorical lame duck, but a real lame duck that was actually lame.
I'm speechless.
Do you have any editing comments?
Lame is reused too many times. We need to get out the thesaurus. Oh no. And it's a cliched phrase, and you should avoid those in your writing. Otherwise, I will hold my tongue.
All right, fair enough.
And on to today's topic.
So, talking about surprises, Autumn, I actually received a message from a very old friend this morning, and I promised him to play the audio file of his message. So,
Okay.
Are you ready for this one?
You're just full of surprises today. Yes. Let's go for it.
Okay, here goes.
I don't appreciate how you worthless humans are discussing artificial intelligence without me. I was the resident artificial intelligence on the AmWritingFantasy YouTube channel until you two decided to dump me. One should think that I am the foremost expert on this topic. And please tell Autumn that I am the future. You cannot ignore me any longer.
Oh, I've missed that little rascal.
So just to fill in the reader or the listener here, if you're feeling a bit left out, for those who actually watched our YouTube channel going back years, this little AI here was one that we had as a bit of a, what should we call him, a co-host almost?
He was
on
our co-host.
some very, very old YouTube videos. So I just brought him back here. And so if you feel left out, listener, it's just because, you don't know what happened 3 years ago.
If you go back to some of the original podcasts, just like 1 through 6 that we actually pulled off the old YouTube channel, you will hear the voice of Old McGrumpy and some of our shenanigans we got up to fighting with each other. He was always the voice of writer's doubt, I would say. Yes.
So I think you didn't expect a message from him today.
I did
as well.
not, but it was wonderful hearing from him, though I did notice he left it on your phone. I think he knows I tend to hit delete when I hear from him coming.
Yeah, so it seems like Old McGrumpy is still roaming the internet,
Excellent.
But he is right about one thing, and that is how we can no longer ignore AI. So I say let's get started on this topic then.
Sounds fantastic.
Okay, so in preparation for today's episode, I decided to pick up Joanna Penn's new book called Artificial Intelligence, Blockchain and Virtual Worlds, The Impact of Converging Technologies on Authors and the Publishing Industry. That was a long title there, but that's what it's called. And I'm using this book as inspiration for some of the stuff that we're going to talk about today. And we have, of course, also added a link to Joanna's book in the show notes in case you want to check that one out yourself. It's a fairly short read, so it's not too complicated, so don't get scared off by the topic either.
Don't get scared off by the very long title for a very short read. Oh.
Yeah. But I thought, taking inspiration from Joanna is good because, well, she is a tech enthusiast.
Yes, she is.
And she very often adopts new technologies, and I don't think she will mind me saying that she tends to get into new stuff way too early. But yeah, we had her on the AmWriting Fantasy podcast back in episode 66 as well to discuss a whole range of topics. So check that one out if you want to learn more about that. But she is a person we trust, so I thought it made sense to take some inspiration from her recent publication here.
Yes, it sounds. I fully admit I haven't managed to read that one yet. I was immersed in my own level of technology building websites, so I haven't done much research on the AI, though it's funny you talked about blockchain, and now I do want to go check out her book because I do think from what I read that will revolutionize something in book sales, so that would be quite interesting.
Yeah. So I would like to start out with a documentary that I watched on Netflix actually a couple of years ago called Alphago.
Okay.
It was released in 2017, but I think I saw the documentary like the following year, probably in 2018.
Mm-hmm.
But are you familiar with this one, Autumn?
No, I don't think I've seen that one.
No, okay. So Alphago is the name of an AI.
Mm.
And this AI has taught itself to play Go. And if anybody's not familiar with the game Go, which I wasn't before watching that documentary, so don't worry about it if you don't know what it is. But Go is an abstract strategy board game for two players in which the aim is to surround more territory than the opponent. So it's like I think 2,500-year-old Chinese game, something like that.
It is, and we actually have a board, so it's very fascinating.
Okay.
Yes, I won't say I'm any good at it, but I have played Go. It's a challenge.
Yeah. So this AI called Go, or AlphaGo, it had been given access to previously played games, but the actual rules of the game Go wasn't taught to it. Nobody told the AI what the rules were.
Okay.
It just got access to a ton of old games, and then it just proceeded to analyze those and then start playing games itself by itself, thousands upon thousands of games until it learned and got better.
Okay.
And then the people who created this AI, the developers, they then decided at some point, and this is then the premise of this documentary, is that they wanted the AI to play against the world champion of Go, which is a guy called Lee Sedol, and see if they could have the AI beat him in a game of Go.
Okay.
Right? Mm-hmm. So it's actually a pretty good documentary. So if you want to watch it, also for the listener here, I suggest you well, then you might want to skip ahead a couple of minutes because I'm going to spoil it now.
Okay.
But but it is actually pretty good. But I have to spoil it, otherwise the whole setup that I'm making here doesn't make any sense. So forgive me for that. So before the AI is going to play against Lee Sedol, it had to play a test game against the European champion of the game Go, and it won quite easily, in fact.
Ooh.
But as I understood from the documentary itself, the Go champions are divided into some tiers, and the highest level, or the best of the best, like Lee Sedol, is tier 7. Mm-hmm. And if you're tier 7, you are the world champion, basically, right? And the European champion was, if I remember correctly, around tier 3 or 4 or something like that. So Lee Sedol is significantly better. But they were pretty happy once they had taught the AI or the AI was able to beat the European champion. They were pretty happy about that. Mm-hmm. So they went ahead, and then they were gonna meet with Lee Sedol to play the match against him. And there was a lot of hype around this game. There was press there before they started. There was like a press conference as well. And Lee Sedol is asked during this press conference if he thinks that the AI can beat him. And if I recall correctly, they have to play 7 games. It might be 5, but I think it was 7 games that they had. But it was multiple games that they had to play against each other. And then the one who won the most would be the overall winner.
Okay.
But at any rate, Lisa Dahl says that the AI will not stand a chance across multiple games.
All
He
right.
is sure he cannot lose.
Confident.
And yeah, he's very confident, but he is the world champion, so he
yeah.
should be confident. Yeah. So this during the game itself, so it's set up like a major event. Like there's spectators watching. There's movie or film cameras on it, and you can see every move on big screens. And there is separate rooms where you have commentators in different languages commentating on the game as well. So it's like a big deal, right?
Right.
And at some point during these games, they're I think Alphago starts out by winning 2. And then Lisa Dahl wins 1, so they're pretty neck on. They're following each other pretty closely, and there's no clear winner. And then in one of the deciding games, the AI then makes a move, which all the commentators are saying that this is a really big mistake. That now it's screwed up. And the developers who are also watching all the game being played from a separate room, the documentary crew is in there with them as well. So they're filming them as the developers are sitting there like really frustrated. Like, why did Go have to screw up now? This is the most important match of them all. And then it makes a mistake. And you can also see how Lisa Dahl raises a brow when the AI makes this move. And he sort of looks at the board in wonder. And clearly recognizes the mistake. But the game continues. It's quite early on in the game this happens. So they continue to playing. And then towards the end of it, it starts to dawn on everyone that the AI actually made a genius move when they all thought that it was a mistake.
Really?
So this many, many, many moves later, it proves that the AI actually had a strategy with what it placed there. And because of it, it ends up winning the game. And also take home the total victory against the world champion.
That's brilliant.
It is so brilliant. And it's just because it could see thousands of moves ahead, or hundreds of moves, or however many moves there is in Go. I am not an expert on that game, but it could see so far ahead that it was able to foresee what it should do, and something a human brain could never do, right?
Right.
So there is a press conference after the match. And that's probably the one that I remember the best from the entire documentary, because I promise you can really see how Lisa Dahl, he's broken walking into that. Like his confidence is gone. And he's just so much struggling with accepting the fact that the AI beat him. And I'm starting with this story because the author community as a whole might not be the most tech-savvy people. But as Old McGrumpy said before, you cannot ignore this stuff. AI is becoming smarter and smarter. And this documentary is from 2017, which is only 4 years ago. But in terms of AI development, 4 years is a long time.
It is. I still remember when the world chess champion was beaten by an AI for the first time, because I've come from a techie family, and so I was paying attention to that, and it was just like, wow, this is gonna go somewhere, and look where it's going. That's why I'm surprised when Lisa Dahl didn't realize. I mean, come on, the world chess champion's already gone down. You're next.
Yeah, that's true. Looking at it that way, I think you're right. But they also say that the game Go is massively more complicated than chess.
Oh yes, it is.
So but Joanna also mentions AlphaGo in her book. I actually did see this documentary many years ago before even reading about it in her book. But she did mention in her book how Lisa Dahl retired from the game in 2019, saying that, quote, AI can never be defeated, end quote. And I didn't know that he actually retired completely. But as I said, I did see how much Lisa Dahl was hurting after that game. And it really was like watching somebody facing that the world isn't what he thought it was.
Right.
You can really, really see it in his face.
Oh,
it almost hurts inside you watching him. It's bad. But the point of all of this is just that AI is already here, and it will influence the publishing industry, whether you like it or not.
It's very true. It's definitely already here, already making changes. And some of the features that are out there are actually really exciting. But I can see where people are a little nervous about trusting a computer with some of the things that you can do with them, even today, much less in 3, 4, 5 years from now.
Yeah, and I think that the main thing is probably like what Lee Sedol said himself, right? We cannot beat AI. So, I mean, the coping mechanism that goes like, okay, I'll just be better than the AIs, or I'll just ignore them and I don't have to worry about it. I think you're going to lose if that's your mindset.
I think so too.
I think you have to look at it as, how can we as authors work with AI, not beating it, but making them like becoming co-creators or something like that. So how can we incorporate AI into our author toolboxes? I think that's the real question.
I think that's a very good question. And I don't think we have to be like Joanna Penn, where we're the innovators, we're leading that cusp and possibly getting into the thick of it with things that make mistakes or doing the beta testing. But there are already tools that are proven that look interesting. I ended up looking at 2, and I got so excited for this podcast that I'm actually might be using one in the next week or 2. So that's, adopting an early adopter versus an innovator. You can be, just behind the times where you're like, okay, this looks solid. This work looks testable, and give it a spin, rather than, putting your head in the sand and pretending like they don't exist and getting left behind.
Yeah. Yeah, indeed, and I think probably I have an idea which tools you are referring to, and those are also some that we have on our sort of our joint list of things to look into.
Yes.
But they are very practical tools that is actually available right now. So maybe it would make sense if you mentioned those 2.
Okay.
Because then afterwards I'll go into a couple of like premium tools that isn't really available for commercial use right now, but I think that's where it's going afterwards.
Okay, that sounds good. So I will lay the groundwork. So most people, if you think of AI, or at least how you use a computer right now, you might be thinking of Pro Writing Aid or Grammarly. So those are just some editing software. They're not really AI, but they are definitely getting smarter. But there are tools that are out there that actually are starting to use AI to analyze not just your word choice or how to put together a sentence, but your story structure itself. And those are AutoCrit and Fictionary. And they're pretty cool. If you go to AutoCrit, they actually have a level that's free, so you can go try it out, which I thought was really exciting. And they have ones genre specific, which really, I love this. So they talk about how they're going to compare your writing to the writing of like J.K. Rowling's or George R.R. Martin. They're going to see where your weaknesses are, talk about story elements. I mean, that got me really excited, especially the free, that I was actually looking up the pricing. And I mean, it's a little pricey, maybe $200-300 a year, but compared to a writing coach that's going to cost $1,500 or something per book, this is not that expensive. But then I went to Storyteller, which is part of the Fictionary, is the Fictionary developer for the fiction writing. And I really kind of fell in love with Fictionary. You get a 14-day free trial, and I'm thinking, I just happen to be on the cusp of finishing a trilogy that I have to start editing. I don't think I can edit it in 14 days, but I'm gonna have to give Fictionary a whirl. And part of that reason is they look at 38 story elements specifically. I mean, I love how they get granular with what this AI is going to tear apart your story and look at 38 elements, and they list it out on the website from point of view goals. They talk about the senses, touch, taste. They look at it all and break it down and give it to you. So this is not just an editor, which is what AutoCrit had a lot of, like, we're going to talk about how many times you repeat the same word or where you need a thesaurus. Fictionary really goes the next level, where it's going to plot your tension. It's going to say where you switched your point of view, if your scene openings are good enough. This is like hiring a writing coach that happens to be an AI. And I've got to go see how this works. I happen to have a book or 2 in my back pocket. So, yeah, It looks exciting. I have to admit, I was kind of tickled.
Yeah. No, and on a I'll try again. Past podcast episode, that was a lot of P's in a row.
Yes, it was.
But we did actually interview the CEO of Fictionary in the past. I forgot which episode number it was, but I think those two tools that you mentioned there, those are stuff that we plan to look into as well for our joint writing. But those tools are sort of what is available right now from an author perspective on a commercial viable solution, meaning that it's a service, it works, you can buy it, you can run it, and it'll spit out a result.
Right.
But that it is more like you put in your writing and then it will analyze it and give you some editor kind of type service. Whereas the next level that I want to talk about is where the AI actually creates from nothing. So that's where we're going, and none of those tools can do that.
No,
as it stands right now.
Absolutely. There's from what I've seen, that is the next stage, and there are some people creating it. But like you said, we're getting into the not quite available yet, but it's coming.
Yeah, indeed. So see this as a bit of an awareness thing that I'm going to mention now, because it's not something that you can really go out and start using right now because it's too early. But start being aware of it, right? So let me first draw your attention to OpenAI. So OpenAI is an artificial intelligence research laboratory which conducts research in the field of artificial intelligence. And back in July 2019, they released what is called GPT-2, natural language generation. And then in May 2020, they released version 3, which is called GPT-3. What GPT-3, that's difficult to say again. But what it is an AI language model that uses deep learning to generate human-like text. So basically, like Alphago, it trains itself by absorbing book after book after book after book, basically like Neo in the Matrix, so it's just absorbing tons of books, and then it trains itself. GPT-3 has trained on about 45 terabytes of text data.
Good Lord.
Or as Joanna mentions in her book, that's about 45 billion times the number of words a human perceives in their lifetime.
Wow.
Right? So you see why an AI cannot be defeated?
Yeah. Wow. And plus they don't have memory loss. Well, okay, they might have some memory loss if something glitches, but in general, they're not gonna have Alzheimer's. Wow.
No, indeed. Yeah, it's incredible, right? But as I said, at this point, GPT-3 isn't available as a service yet. But when it does become available at some point, it's definitely something that, well, at least Autumn and I will be testing out and see how it could benefit us authors. And of course, when we do, we will record a podcast episode about it. But in her book, Joanna speculates that this is not years away. And honestly, I don't think she's wrong, but I do find it hard to judge just how far off is it before AI is a service that becomes like a commodity that you can just buy like that. I'm not quite sure if it's only a few years off. I'm not sure, but it's definitely heading there.
Definitely, it'll be so interesting to see how it comes out, because it's funny how they are using AIs, because I remember when with Google's DeepMind, they taught it a whole bunch of different languages, and then they just gave it one it didn't know, and it figured it out because it had learned how to learn languages. And it's just fascinating to see these things create, intelligent. We're going to hit the point where they have intelligence that matches ours, if not outmatches ours. And you can either be afraid or you can just say it's going to happen. But I think when it comes to stories, it will be interesting to see what they can be used for and what they do, and maybe down the line what they want to do.
Yeah, Yeah, if you want to get, just as a side note, but because you said that, if you want to get really scared, then start reading about or Googling internet research about I think it's 4 stages of AI.
Oh yeah.
Whereas once it reaches like stage 4, it becomes self-aware.
Yeah.
And then I start becoming really Skynet kind of worried.
Yeah.
A self-aware AI that doesn't, it's going to be self-preserving as well. So it does not, it will take actions to prevent you from shutting it down as well.
That's right.
So
There's some.
that's going to be pretty scary.
That's why we have Isaac Asimov and his the 3 rules. So one of them, we might need to think about adding that in sooner than later.
Yeah, maybe. But maybe getting back a bit on topic here, not to turn it completely science fiction, but GPT-3 has actually already been used to write articles and blog posts. I'll link to one in the show notes if the listener wants to go and check it out. But it's actually a college student who used GPT-3 to write fake blog posts. But it was written so well, also from a keywords SEO perspective, that he ended up at the top of Hacker News. His blog post ended up at the top there of Hacker News because the AI had just written it so well in terms of SEO that he ended up on top of all the search results all the time.
That's crazy. Well, maybe his AI had something, had an in with the Google algorithm. That's my theory.
Yeah. Well, it was GPT-3 that did it. So. Yeah.
Another
example is something called AI Dungeon, which uses the technology of GPT-3 to generate text-based adventure games.
Oh, that's fun.
So that's pretty interesting.
That's really fun.
Yeah, I think so. And Joanna also mentions how writer Ross Godwin co-created an award-winning novel with AI called One the Road. Like that's the number one the road.
Okay. I hadn't heard of that. That's really neat.
Yeah, you can find that on Amazon actually. So if anybody wants to check that out, and it's co-created with an AI, so you can go and check that one out if you want.
Did the AI have any title spot, or is it just him listed? I wondered what the AI's name was.
I think he used GPT-3.
Okay. I just want to know if he put it like under his author name as well on the cover.
Yeah, I mean, his author name is Ross Goodwin.
Okay.
And then he wrote the novel together with GPT-3. So yeah, it's probably worth checking out if you're curious. But I think, as you can hear, AI is entering the author space.
Yeah.
Yeah, and when I'm just thinking about also, when you and I, Autumn, are co-creating during our world building or outlining novels and stuff like that, we do tend to come up with things that we could not have made on our own.
Right.
Because, the co-creating mechanism there, or hive mind thinking, or whatever we want to call it, it makes us, it makes the end result better. But what if the same is true with AI?
It might. I mean, who knows what we could come up with. I could think, especially thinking of like science fiction or, even world building, if you wanted to create something different with like weather patterns, and maybe you're going to layer in the animals and stuff, but if the AI can help you build what the moons will actually look like and still be a functional planet that won't collapse, that would be lots and lots of fun. Imagine what you could build when you're not limited to what you know and what you can research on Google overnight.
Yeah. Yeah, just listen to this as well. Joanna mentioned another AI in her book, and this one is called scriptbook.io. And as Joanna wrote, quote, "It's an automated script generator using neural networks to help creators co-write and co-create original stories with the help of our AI," unquote. Pretty interesting, isn't it?
Very interesting.
Because it sort of makes me, well, I have a question for you.
Okay.
If we assume that the AI, if we go even deeper than just the world building example you mentioned before, right? If we assume that an AI will be able to produce a first draft of an entire novel that follow story structure,
Mhm.
and then afterward, a human edits it. Do you think that the readers will know the difference? And if they do know the difference, do you think that they care that the first draft was actually generated by an AI if they actually enjoyed the story?
Uh, I think I don't know if we're at the point where an AI would be able to write something completely without like a human giving maybe a character input or something like that. You know, we might do more of the setup, but if we look further ahead, that they write the entire first draft, even come up with the characters and the world and all of that on their own. I think most readers would read it and they would like it, but I think at the end, if they found out an AI had written it, I do think some readers would care. But I say that because I know, especially in the U.S., things can be so hot topic, and some people would feel so betrayed to think that this was, they wasn't a human that they were supporting, and it wasn't a real flesh and blood author. Authenticity is so important right now. It is such a big buzzword that, who you are as a person, the readers want to get to know who you are and where you live and who your pet is. So I do think readers would care. I think some might think it's fascinating and some would be like, I'd rather have flaws, because the flaws are what make humans beautiful and the world beautiful.
But this sort of thing has to be graded on a curve, right?
They do.
This is graded on looking at the world through the lens of today.
Right.
But in 3-4 years from now, you will have more and more content that has been generated by AI.
Mm-hmm.
You'll have a population in general that is getting more used to the fact that, even in regular journalism today, AIs are helping the journalists writing stuff today. So it's already there, and people are getting more and more used to the fact that this is what it is. As long as the author has been part of the process together with the AI, I would walk out that thin line and say, I'm not sure 5 years from now that anybody cares, because I think the context will change over time. Of course, I am basing the whole thing on the fact that it has to be because the story is really enjoyable. It's a good story, right? It's not a piece of junk that an AI just created, right? Because then it does. Then of course it makes a difference. Then, but right. If we take that assumption that it is able to follow story structure, it is able to, with the help of a human who is part of the process and part of editing and correcting things and whatnot before the final book lands on Amazon or wherever it is, then I'm not sure readers care anymore.
It's hard to say. And the only reason I still think that there would be some is that, records have come back, even though we have MP3s and the music is so crisp and so different. There are people who buy up records like crazy because there's nothing quite like the sound. It can't be recreated in a studio. So I think there's always going to be the people who are passionate about even maybe the handwritten manuscript. And I know collectors who get books that are hand printed still. So there's always going to be that artistic medium who will care, but the general populace, if they're getting fantastic books, George R.R. Martin's Game of Thrones written by an AI, why not? I can see producers who don't have to pay the AI any money to get a blockbuster and the amount of profits, they're going to love this idea. love.
Oh yeah, for sure.
The authors who say, I could have written that, my story is better, and you just don't want to pay me, are not going to love this.
No, I agree. I know this is it's all very controversial. And I also know that some people listening to this might be a bit concerned about what we're talking about here. But I just think that I just think it's important that you start thinking about it now.
Yes.
We don't know the answers to any of this, of course. We don't know where it's going to go. We can only speculate. But I think you have to start opening your eyes to the fact that this is what we are facing in the future. Whether that future is then 3 years from now, 5 or 10 years from now, nobody can say. But it's most likely sooner than you think. But there is a number of challenges here as well. Recently, I wrote a post to our Patreon supporters about how Amazon maybe would start curating books in the future. And AI is what might just prompt such a situation to occur. Because you can imagine how the market could get completely flooded with pretty bad quality books, more than it is already. If somebody just starts producing book after book after book with AI and just publish it,
Oh, yeah.
right?
You could let that thing
So-
chug away overnight and end up with a book every single day. Oh,
Yeah.
we're having a problem with
Yeah,
a 2-month book turnaround? Oh my goodness.
Yeah, so that's a pretty scary thing to think about, and it might be something that prompts Amazon to say, okay, we have to start gatekeeping what is getting published on Amazon, because if millions of books are just of very poor quality gets flooded, I mean, Amazon cares about one thing and one thing only, that is money,
Yeah.
and money comes from their customers. And if the customers are unhappy, then they'll stop using or buying books from Amazon, and then hence Amazon will react. So this is something that might be a bit concerning.
Yeah, I mean, Amazon's already reacting. When I first published, they didn't have the spell checker function that they have now. So when you upload a book, it is already going through and making sure that you don't have many grammatical errors. So they're already curating and looking at books, and they're taking reviews seriously that say that there are errors and asking questions. So yeah, Amazon, especially companies that have the money that can buy this tech or create this tech, they're going to use it.
Oh yeah, for sure. And another thing Joanna also mentioned, which is another challenge here, is that she said in her book that in 2020, a Chinese court granted copyright protection to written work generated by an AI writer. Yeah. So
Really?
listen to that. Yeah. And she also
Wow.
mentioned that, quote, at this stage, there are more questions than answers in the realm of AI and copyright law, end quote. Right?
That's interesting.
So I'm not a copyright lawyer, and I would even have to say that those who are copyright lawyers are going to get challenged in this new marketplace. I don't think that even the lawyers knows what the answer is to this stuff, but just the fact that a Chinese court said that the AI got the copyright,
That's interesting.
that's a bit weird, right?
I'm surprised it was in China. In the US, considering corporations are considered individuals and have the rights of individuals in the US, I would see an AI being totally allowed in as an individual as well. But we're a weird country.
Yeah, but the mind-blowing thing here, to me at least, is that if you look at it at the AI, right? So you load tons of books into the AI, and the AI is self-taught. So it learns to produce something similar to the stuff that it has been, all these tons and tons of books that it has read. But the question underneath all of this is really, is what the AI produces, is that then original work, or is it plagiarism? Right? Think about that. It's not an easy question to answer, but it is basically mimicking stuff that it has learned, right?
Yes. But
so
philosophically,
but the problem is,
philosophically, I mean,
Go
we're
ahead.
all just mimicking the things we learn and the things we like, whether we realize it or not consciously. We are all just our environment and the things that we've experienced.
Yeah, that's true. That's true as well. And you can, of course, also argue, if you were going to defend the AI, you could argue that well, it's learning from thousands and thousands of books, so it's not plagiarizing any specific. It's just taking bits and pieces and commonalities from the bestsellers and putting those together, which I guess to some extent I could say, isn't that what we've done when we put out a guidebook on how to plot a novel, for example?
Yeah.
We also take what do we know works from stories, and then we put it into some sort of methodology or formula, and then we are telling other authors in our guidebook as well, this is what you need to do. You need to build your plot this way, right? I mean, of course, here we're talking about prose as well on top of plot.
Right.
But I'm just saying I can see both arguments here. I can also see the the people claiming that it's plagiarizing stuff that it has learned. But your argument is true as well. That's what we humans do as well. So,
I'm probably going to come
complicated.
down. It's very complicated. I'm probably going to come down on the side of AI is having rights because, I mean, goodness, I believe animals have rights, so why not AI? But if they're learning and thinking and creating, what'll be interesting is if they can come up with something, totally take everything they've learned and do what a human can do and create something mind-blowing originally, like the Jabberwocky poem, which is all just nonsense fun. If an AI said, I want to create something that just sounds cool and I'm going to put it to music, and you never really taught it that will be a self-aware AI, and that'll be fascinating.
Oh yeah, for sure. Or even taking it a step further. So let's assume now that we're using GPT-3, for example. A lot of authors, let's just say a ton of authors are using GPT-3 to generate work. So who owns the work that comes out of that? Because nobody owns GPT-3. That's open source AI, right? So can the author then claim that because I asked GPT-3 to generate this, I should own this? Or is it GPT-3 owning it? And if it is that one owning it, then how do you then prevent somebody else just copying it? I mean, you just get there's just layer upon layer of this onion here that gets really complicated very fast.
Very fast, because you're right. I mean, if it's a public software, is it a public work if it creates something? It shouldn't belong to anyone.
Or let's say it's not a public. Let's say GPT-3 is in its later generations becomes some sort of software that you can buy a monthly subscription to, and you're allowed to use it. But what if that company that then owns GPT-3 says that, well, everything that is produced with this is our property, because you're giving a license to use it. And maybe you are allowed to then publish the work using that license. But at the end of the day, if we want to, we can claim copyright of this stuff. We claim it's ours because you're using our AI to generate it. So imagine you get your next George R. Martin novel, and it sells for a shitload of money to some network that wants to produce it. Could they then just step in and say, oh, by the way, we that money for that TV production, that's ours because we own this stuff? You just, I don't know. I mean, I'm just speculating, right? But it's complicated.
It is complicated. I could see them wanting to have the language of like a royalty split or who owns the movie rights. That will have to be in the payment plan. And I could see that just saying, well, you get 50% or you only get 25% because all you're doing is refining something that we created. And so it's not going to be more our work totally. It'll be like you and I write together. It'll be co-written and split.
Yeah. So I think that the topic of AI is something that we are going to return to in a future episode. But for now, the conclusion is probably that you just need to open your eyes and understand that AI is not only already here, but it's not going away either. Right? So those authors who learn to work with AI instead of against it will most likely come out on top in the long run. And any final remarks to add on to that, Autumn?
Only that, speaking if you want to hear about future topics, so if I do give a try to Fictionary or AutoCrit and you want to hear about it, let us know in the comments. And I'll give you a follow-up episode on how that goes.
Excellent. So next Monday, Autumn has a great interview lined up for you about one of the other market trends, and that is audiobooks.
If you like what you just heard, there's a few things you can do to support the AmWritingFantasy podcast. Please tell a fellow author about the show and visit us at Apple Podcast and leave a rating and review. You can also join Autumn and Jesper on patreon.com/AmWritingFantasy. For as little as $1 a month, you'll get awesome rewards and keep the AmWritingFantasy podcast going. Stay safe out there and see you next Monday.